All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is the 2021 City Center Speaker Series. I am Claire Swinford, Director of Urban Engagement for Downtown Partnership of Colorado Springs. And for those joining us for the first time today, Downtown Partnership is a nonprofit organization that has served the urban center for decades. We work to ensure that downtown continues to benefit the whole community as the economic, civic, and cultural heart of Colorado Springs. And like many of you, I have watched the city change a lot over my lifetime, and it's our pleasure to offer you this speaker series as a point of connection to help us all understand our roles in ensuring that our city continues to change for the better in this new decade. So for the past 6 years, City Center Series has invited nationally renowned experts in urbanism, innovation, and design to speak to the concerns of our neighbors, community advocates, elected officials, students, industry leaders, and get all of these people to communicate in more informed and inspired ways. Our goal with the City Center Series is to make the conversation about our developing city ever more thoughtful and inclusive. We are especially excited to present this year's speakers entirely online because we know it means a lot of you in the audience are able to join us for the first time. So please let me say we are so glad that you are here. Now, like all the other public benefit programs of Downtown Partnership, the City Center Series is made possible by our members. These are local businesses, regional employers, and community-minded individuals who believe, as we do, that Colorado Springs does best when its downtown is thriving, and they play an active role in our mission. Members in the audience tonight, thank you so much for joining us. Special thanks go to our President's Council members who support downtown at the highest level. You see them there on the screen. Membership is open to everyone, so if you're fired up by what you hear tonight and want to do more, you can become a member online at downtowncs.com/membership. Now, this year's speaker series would not be possible without the support of the Colorado Springs Business Journal and the Colorado Springs Health Foundation, our presenting sponsor. We want to thank CSHF not only for their financial support, but also for their inspiration to think bigger and do better as we explore how our whole community benefits when we pay attention to resiliency, equity, and creative placemaking. We want to thank also our community partners who have supported us by spreading the word about this series to their stakeholders. And now I would like to recognize Patience Kawasa of Food to Power, our sponsor for tonight's talk. Patience, would you please share with us what is Food to Power, how our audience can fuel your mission, and why you chose to sponsor this talk?
Absolutely. Well, welcome. First of all, I want to say thank you for everyone who is tuning in to this City Center series, first time completely virtual. So thank you for entering the space with us today. My name is Patience Kabwasa, Executive Director for Food to Power, formerly Colorado Springs Food Rescue. And our mission really is to cultivate a more equitable food system in the greater Colorado Springs community. We do that in 3 ways. We do that through food access, food education, and production. Our food access, we have no-cost grocery programs to essentially to areas in our city that experience barriers to accessing fresh food, as well as we have a youth internship where we really teach place-based food systems leadership and what barriers to the food system are in our community and what youth can do to get involved, how they can grow their own food, and how they can really become food systems advocates in their own community. We are also building the city's first ever neighborhood food center in the Hillside community, which is just a stone's throw from downtown in a neighborhood that is fastly gentrifying. And our hope there is to really create a space that is a space of learning where neighbors can grow, they can advocate, they can access, and they can cook and build community and learn about fresh food, but also really to be able to be an economic driver in that way centered around food, which is really why we we're so honored to be able to sponsor this talk this evening. And the reason that we did is because when rapid development happens, Hillside neighborhood is historically one of the first African-American neighborhoods in this community. And it is gentrifying, and it does affect the people that live there, particularly when we talk about housing and food access. And so it is our honor to really have folks who are on the margins when rapid development is happening be centered in the conversation. So that's why we are happy to sponsor today.
Thank you so much, Patience. We are also joined tonight by the Reverend Dr. Stephanie Rose Spalding, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, associate professor of Women's and Ethnic Studies, and interim associate vice chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at UCCS. Dr. Stephanie Rose will be moderating Q&A at the end of tonight's session. So if you have questions for our speaker, please feel free to drop those into the Zoom chat. We do ask that you remember our community guidelines and keep your comments brief, polite, and on topic. But for now, please mouse over that upper right-hand corner of your screen to enter speaker view so you can have the best visual possible. Now, a final note before we get started, this speaker series does continue through next month, and we have one more timely topic with a national expert to share with you. Join us again on April 14th, yes, tax day, for a talk with Dr. Keisha Pollock-Porter, professor of health policy and management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Why are we inviting an epidemiologist to the City Center series? Gee, can you think of any reason? Dr. Pollock-Porter's work looks specifically at how public space design impacts public health, and she uses her research to help communities make policies that promote equity and safety where people live, work, play, and travel. So yes, before you ask, we are going to talk about COVID, but that's just the starting point for what's sure to be a fascinating discussion about Colorado Springs' future. You can pre-register for our talk with Dr. Pollock-Porter and watch previous events in the City Center series on our website, downtowncs.com/citycenter. And if you're curious about other downtown partnership events, you can also take that opportunity to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. But now it is my pleasure to introduce Dan Carmody, whose 40-year career has focused on reviving Rust Belt cities through programs that are entrepreneurial, inclusive, empirical, incremental, and organic. Dan is the president of Eastern Market Corporation, the nonprofit that manages and promotes one of Detroit's most venerable institutions. EMC works with many partners to make Detroit healthier, wealthier, and happier by increasing the consumption of healthy food, by creating and expanding small business and employment throughout the regional food sector, and by leveraging the market's role as a community gathering place to bring people together. This isn't Dan's first time working with Colorado Springs, but we know this is the right time to share his insight on what allows a community to retain its most important characteristics. In other words, its soul, even as the landscape changes around them. So please join me in welcoming Dan Carmody. And Dan, we may still have you on mute.
There we go. Thank you, Claire, for that lovely introduction. And hello, everybody, and happy St. Patrick's Day. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to share with you a little bit some perspectives that we've gone through in Eastern Market as the wave of development struck up a huge uptick. So rapid development forces a community, I think, to really think through what is important to the place, what makes Colorado Springs special, what's your identity as a place. And we had a very interesting phone call when we kind of were talking about some of the parameters, and I promised I wouldn't talk about the discordant knowledge that I have of Colorado Springs of having a little bit of this on one side of the extreme and a little bit of that. And it doesn't matter. There are still values you all share, and places like downtown or Eastern Market districts are the places where we need to come together and rally around those fundamental values that really unite us. I think the question that really people need to ask themselves isn't so much what are your current core values as much as what kind of place do you want to leave to your children? And so for me, in the work we've done to really elicit a defense against rapid development, it's a mixture of what's authentic and what's aspirational. The country has kind of had a rude awakening to maybe its history is a much wider story than sometimes we tell school children. And so many of our local communities have such profound and rich local histories that they seemingly choose to ignore. I, for a long time, lived in Rock Island, Illinois. It has one of the great stories of the birth of the computer that it's never merchandised or figured out a way to tell a compelling story. And that's Professor Atanasoff at Iowa State University in the winter of 1936 was doing some research on logic, and his mind froze up. And in those days, Iowa was dry on Sunday, and the closest place you could get a drink, this is kind of an appropriate St. Patrick's Day aside, the closest place he could get a drink was in Illinois. So from Ames, Iowa, that's about a 5-hour drive in his black Ford. He drove over to the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, sat down in a tavern, and after a couple of bourbons or scotches, we're not really sure because his family said they drank both, and this was revealed in a 1974 court case between Sperry Univac and another maker over whose computer was first. Atanasoff had his mental breakthrough in the back of a BevNap, wrote out his logic model for a computer logic system, drove back to Ames, Iowa, and that winter he and John Berry invented the ABC computer, which the court case found to be the first computer, at least in the United States. And so that's a story to me that ought to be told in a community that has, it's still down on its luck in many ways. The aspirational part is we want to live in a place that's special, and sometimes we got problems we got to fix. So build that into your core values. Don't let today necessarily define who you are. Build a set of core values that you can build to. So to me, your core values have to be set in some sort of reality, and that's where the authenticity part. You can't completely be something you're not. Well, you can build on what you are to become better, and that's the aspirational part. And also you need to think through this, who you are, as much from someone who's not deeply experienced in Colorado Springs, what their experience relationship to your community is going to be when they first set eyes on it. So it's an inside out kind of approach. Again, spending some time to figure out what your core values are really are the first thing you need to do in terms of trying to build a solid defense to keep your soul as rapid development occurs. And there are things that most communities embrace that really set us apart. The natural environment of Colorado Springs is spectacular in its mountain setting. For us in Detroit, we're flat as a pancake, but we have a lot of water, and we have access, and our orientation to the Detroit River is a profound part of our natural environment. Just like your view to the Rocky Mountains is a profound part of your natural environment. How do you take advantage of those natural assets? How do you build from them? Previous generations have built the downtown Colorado Springs you have and the neighborhoods around it, which I always like to think of them as one economic unit. You've got a business mix today, but how does that need to be preserved? How does that need to be enhanced? You've got great stories. We talked a little bit about that. And the art, you've already done a lot in the arts. You got great murals. I've seen some nice public art in my time that I was there. Those really help to animate those stories. And what we're trying to deal with oftentimes, and this is, I think, a civic problem, maybe globally, but certainly nationally and not just local. We got to get out of the idea of trying to change people's minds. We got to change their hearts. And that aspect of storytelling and the narrative and the richness is really trying to align people around the stories that can move your hearts. The heads, there's a lot of reasons heads are more difficult. When we began our work in Detroit, we were coming off a 40-year run where no development looked bad. We were like the poster child for Rust Bucket Depression. And as we saw development coming at us, we came up with 3 different strategies that I'll share with you, both in our story and then hopefully lead to some discussion about how Colorado Springs might be inspired. First of all, let's not assume that all developers are evil, that you can build a development culture that actually supports a community's core values. And that takes work, I think, across private, nonprofit, and public sector to build that supportive culture. The public sector has a role to play. There's a lot of tools in both the incentive and regulatory side that as development comes, it needs regulatory approvals. Sometimes it needs incentives. And if your city is like our city, they should be listening to community groups like the Downtown Colorado Springs or those neighborhood groups in the neighborhoods around. And those organizations need to, as part of that culture of developing one that supports core values, needs to find out from its stakeholders, from its residents, from its small business owners, what's worth fighting for. What are their core values? Are they shared across the spectrum? Lastly, an active nonprofit group is often needed to do the kind of real estate projects that the for-profit sector can't or won't do. So in my career stops, I have typically led the development of an associated nonprofit that does real estate projects to access funding sources that private for-profit companies can't, as ways to achieve social goals, whether it's incubating small businesses, providing space at below market rental costs, or introducing affordable housing into a place that has very little of it. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Eastern Market, and hopefully, the situation is very different in some ways, but rapid development, I think, is a pretty consistent thing in how it can affect the community. And I think there are certain ways that you can help guide real estate development that cut across the context. But please do note where it's important. I hope to call out where the contextual differences might make a difference. We were a nonprofit that was selected in 2006 by the city of Detroit to manage a large public market. It covers 5 buildings and 165,000 square feet. It has a wholesale market. It has a variety of retail markets, 5 different principal sheds. It's also a district that's currently about 140 acres, and we're expanding it by about another 65 acres. And our chant that people love this place over its 130-year history just as much in 2006 when we started as they do today, as they did 50 and 130 years ago. The chant was, make it better, but don't change anything. And I think that's kind of the nature of the beast in terms of most of our communities do need investment. And we have a path. We can take a path where people get displaced and nobody cares, or we can build a path where we do get investment. We do improve the quality of life for everyone, not just for the people who came last. And so it takes a lot of work, but we do think it is possible. We're governed by a 21-member board of directors. It's an unusual structure. A third are appointed by the city. The city still owns the market proper. A third represent the vendors in the market sheds and the merchants and the businesses around the market. And a third represent other or community groups. It could be School of Ag from Michigan State. It could be a major foundation supporter of the market. It could be a lot of different things. Our core budget's about $5 million, not inclusive of capital improvement projects for the year. And we employ 50 full-time equivalents, split nearly equally between full-time and part-time and seasonal, 25 full FTEs of each. 3 missions: promote and manage the market on a daily basis, serve as the economic development organization, the community planning organization for the specified geographical area called the Eastern Market District. And then lastly, much like Food to Power, leverage Eastern Market to improve food access and to strengthen the regional food economy by making the food sector as vital as we can do. Since we've been here in 2006, we've seen just shy of now $18 million invested. The sheds go back to the teens and 20s. Shed 3 didn't have one single pane of glass in it. After a $6.5 million renovation, it was transformed. And just doing these big projects, we learned a lot about inclusion. When we started doing these projects, transforming what was somewhat derelict, but certainly deferred maintenance facilities into really show places, some of our low income customers thought that we were trying to market something that wasn't for them. And so early on, we got word of that if you remember back, for those of you old enough to remember the 2008 economic meltdown, right before the bottom fell out of the economy, prices were skyrocketing. Food prices the summer of 2008 were as high as they've ever been in the history of the world. And we were doing a different shed renovation at the time. And a lot of our low income customers expressed to us that they thought the reason food prices were going up was because we were fixing the market up. And we took that as their perceived wisdom. And it made us think very carefully about product mix at the market. So in the world of farmers markets, and by the way, holy cow, how many does Colorado Springs have? I thought there'd be a couple downtown I could sort of work into the slide presentation. It looked like there were like 20 in Colorado Springs alone. That's a tremendous farm to table culture that's something to take advantage of in Colorado Springs. But going back to 2008, when we heard that sentiment expressed, we were very concerned. And we thought about the product mix we have and our Saturday market. And keep in mind, we don't have permanent vendors. We're truly like a farmer's market. We have operations this time of year just on Saturday. But come June, we'll have a Saturday market, a Tuesday market, and a Sunday market that are retail. And then we'll have a Monday through Friday, midnight to 5 a.m. wholesale market. The Saturday market is the big kahuna. This time of year, it's 4,000 or 5,000 people. In warm months, it's 25, 30, sometimes as many as 40,000 people. It's one of the most rocking Saturday mornings in America. And if you're ever in Detroit, please do join us. You won't forget it. But one of the traditions of the Saturday market was that that's the day when all the wholesale growers that used to be the reason we existed dumped all their not so fresh product at bargain basement prices to clean their shelves off for the start of the next week. And we still had, quite frankly, in 2007, we probably had too much of that product and not enough of the better stuff. And we, over the 5-year period from about 2007 to 2012, really did increase the amount of higher cost, higher quality goods. But when we began to get that feedback in 2008 about how we were changing the market and it was no longer for me, poor person, we were very, very purpose-filled about maintaining a full spectrum of price-value relationship. And so if you come at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can still find a case of product that you can buy for pennies on the dollar. But you should know that you should probably go through that case to find the 10 or 12 pairs that are no longer edible. Some markets wouldn't even allow that on their floor. But we have customers who come who are too proud to take food stamp or other forms of food assistance, which we offer, and try to help poor people buy better quality product where we can. But we believe ultimately that any way to get people to eat fruits and vegetables more than they are now is a better thing. So we purposely maintain a full spectrum from the highest cost, highest quality to lower cost, lower quality, because we want to make sure we're welcoming to customers of all incomes. And downtowns, I think, and I come out of the downtown world, we never really looked at the low income sector as one that we fought for. Sometimes in a lot of older depressed downtowns, those were the only customers we still had left. But I would argue we're leaving a lot of customer needs unmet, and we're not benefiting our business as much if we focus too narrowly on who our customers are. Over the 10 years, we finally boiled down our work into a simple vision statement, and that's our job is to nourish this rich history of a place that people love, to nourish a healthier, wealthier, and happier Detroit. Now, in our assessment of where we were in 2015, we came up with 3 key core values. We're a place where small independent businesses start, particularly those with limited means. This isn't a role of just Eastern Market. It's probably a role of every downtown and every public market in the history of humankind. especially public markets. That was the original pop-up. That was the place where people that couldn't afford a brick and mortar could at least begin to sell something. And we're very proud of that tradition. Some of the best psychic income I've ever gotten from a job are listening to family after family in Southeast Michigan. Seems like it's about 1 out of every 20 people have some kind of relation whose immigrant grandparent or great grandparent or great uncle started selling something in Eastern Market that led to a career in something. Maybe it was food, but maybe it was insurance or real estate. We're a place about food. So we were the wholesale market for Southeast Michigan from 1891 to 1925, when we got competition from rail produce coming in from Texas and California and Florida. And then by the 1980s, when all the regional grocers started building their own regional distribution centers, we became marginalized. So today our wholesale market exists, but it is a lonely stepchild of its once glorious past. However, some of the slaughtering operations went away, but we became a major employment center for meat processing. So we have a handful of companies that operate national distribution from single plant sources in Eastern Market. If you bought corned beef for this year's St. Patrick's Day holiday from a Walmart or Sam's Club, it probably came out of Eastern Market from the EW Global Company that's been making corned beef in Detroit since 1877. If you've had a fresh burger patty at Five Guys anytime in the last few years, it probably came from Wolverine Packing Company that distributes 20 million fresh burger patties a week pre-COVID. I'm not sure where they're at right now. And lastly, we're a place where everybody is warmly welcomed. And so everybody is warmly welcomed. Anybody that wants to behave civilly is welcome to our place. Those became our 3 sort of marching orders. This is what we must defend. This is who we are. Now, make no mistake, we needed investment. This is a scene from when I first got to the market that is now a pedestrian greenway that connects the Detroit River to the heart of some of the neighborhoods in Detroit. It's called the DeQuinder Cut. It was once one of the busiest rail lines in America when all the automobile manufacturers were all located in the city. By the 60s and 70s, the rail had stopped and it was overgrown with weeds. It's one of our major transformation points. So we saw coming a huge wave of investment because in Detroit, about 2015 or so, downtown and another neighborhood, Midtown, were suddenly hot from a real estate perspective. And we knew that it was a matter of time before it came to us. And we knew we should be fearful of this big wave of investment because if you look around the world at other urban food districts, most of them don't withstand this wave of urban investment. This is Melbourne, Australia. This is the Queen Victoria Market. It makes our market look like chump change as a market, but there's no neighborhood around the Queen Victoria Market other than high rises and skyscrapers. Now, we don't have the real estate pressures in anybody's expectation that Melbourne has had or we will have anytime soon, but still closer to home in Chicago, there was a much equally disheartening transformation in 10 years. A place called the Fulton Street Market area, west of the Loop in Chicago, looked a lot like Eastern Market. This picture here could be from Eastern Market today, but within 10 years, it was suddenly the home of actually McDonald's Corporation world headquarters, moved from the suburbs to be in this hip, trendy neighborhood that had food that made it cool. This was a complete option that could have been pursued if we did not start in 2015 drafting a strategy. And we saw a different route. Could we leverage this large wave of investment to help us make the market an even stronger place to help us in our effort to make Detroit healthier, wealthier, and happier? And we thought there were 3 things we could do. As I'm going to repeat this until I beat it into everyone's head. You can build a strong culture, and that starts with a compelling strategy. You got to think it through. You got to get people on your side. You got some splaining to do, as Lucy might say to Ricky. We developed a set of development protocols which lay out for developers as they're coming in looking at properties to buy. Here are our expectations. Often community benefits agreements are implemented by cities, and they're a great tool, but when they come at the end of the development imagining process, there's not a whole lot you can beat out of a project that hasn't already been beaten out of it. We think it's better to give people the expectations on the front end where they can build things into their pro formas that otherwise might not be the case. We pay attention to the numbers. So we want to know what the rental rates are. We want to know if our prices are moving up, that we have to be worried about some of our long cherished retailers can no longer afford to stay. We need to figure out a strategy to segment what space we do have. So there's affordable space, there's medium price space, and perhaps there does need to be some high price space if we're going to actually ever redevelop that big vacant building I just pictured along the DeQuinder Cut. And then lastly, we want to honor those developers that get it. It's carrots and sticks, carrots and sticks. It's all you got. And sometimes we focus too much on the sticks and not enough on the carrots. So we institute an annual awards program where we thank those developers who do some of the things we want done that might not be a part of a traditional development. So we also established a subsidiary, Eastern Market Development Corporation, as a tool to use foundation and public sector and other support the private sector's developers can access to do things that they can or won't do. So I'll talk about it a little bit, but creating low-cost space for new next generation food processing businesses at $7 to $9 a square foot. That's something we can't ask the for-profit development community to do. That's something we got to do. We also want to make the place sexy and attractive to other community-based nonprofit groups. So Develop Detroit, an African-American owned development company, limited profit. They've got a lovely project plan for the market that will build some commercial space and provide for a mix of affordable housing well beyond the city's 20% requirement for affordable housing. And then lastly, you do have to pay attention to the regulatory framework, looking again for sticks and carrots. Historic preservation is both a stick and a carrot. You can control it, or you can also, I know Colorado has a fabulous state historic tax credit. Michigan just revived its. So now we have tools to help preserve some of these older buildings that might be at risk. And we're actually in the process of doing something I came within 2 years of retirement of avoiding my 42 career as a educated city planner. We're rezoning the entire market district in the expansion area. It's been a lot of work trying to explain to people why we should rezone all of those parcels, but we think it's important to create a better regulatory framework. So this is our proximity to the city center. We're less than a mile from downtown. We had a target on our back as soon as development started to pick up. We knew this wave was coming. We commissioned a $250,000 strategic study. We searched the world for planning firms who had done urban markets and urban settings faced with the kind of investment wave that we're talking about. And we only found two in America. They both worked with the market, whose name suddenly flew out of my brain, Borough Market in London, England. And they both did really excellent planning work there, trying to figure out how to keep a market district in the middle of a very successful city. One firm was out of Philadelphia, one firm was out of New York. And they did a wonderful strategy. It forced a good strategy, a good plan of any kind, will force you to engage with hundreds of people who care about what it is you're planning. I think we had over 600 people involved in various engagement. And through that process, we convinced a lot of people that if we did not add significantly to the market district, that all of the established, the larger food companies that employ as many as 2,000 people all by themselves, not counting all the small and medium-sized ones, but just the large ones who are all landlocked, we'd be losing in the next 10 years. This blue area corresponds to a very high degree of basically vanishing urban fabric. Over 50 years, disinvestment happened. City, county, state agencies own 70 to 80% of land from foreclosure, failure to pay real estate taxes. So highly vacant, but not entirely vacant. That's the blue area. The red area is the current core market, which has a lot of redevelopment needs in it. The yellow area there is the market proper. So it's a two-part strategy. One was we grow the market district to keep established food businesses. And then we look at this red area as we know that these older historic buildings are cooler for other non-food uses like residential lofts or retail, or now weed shops like Colorado, where it's legal weed, which is its own real estate engine, which I will not be getting into today. And we still need we still need some of that cheap old space for those small food companies so we can grow them into big ones to move into the blue area. So that became the two-part strategy that we finished that in early 2016. And for 2 years, we discussed with the city, it's new to planning department that was reborn out of Detroit's bankruptcy, why the strategy was important. But they didn't own it. That was our strategy. They needed to do another plan that actually focused on implementation. This cost $800,000 and led to another 400 to 600 people being engaged in the process. But between those two planning initiatives, we established the momentum and detailed plans on how to implement something to be able to really raise the objective of retaining and attracting food sector jobs as an important public policy outcome. And so this land here, which is highly vacant, is scheduled over a period of the next 10 years. You can see a lot of vacancy, to be a very integrated neighborhood featuring modern food processing facilities, some mid-rise buildings with live work kind of spaces. But while we're attracting and retaining larger food companies, we also have this large donut of an area we want to make, which had the highest degree of residential use left. This area was all single family homes at one point. We want to make this one of the best little neighborhoods in Detroit. And so extensive use of stormwater management, tying back to our natural environment to buffer food industrial uses, which are these days, they don't smell, they don't make a lot of noise. They can be an okay neighbor. And working with these neighbors is a challenge because nobody wants a factory in their front yard. Now, some of this land was already zoned industrial. So if it wasn't something that looked better, it was going to be worse. But in America, we've done it so badly for so long that we forget that in places, particularly in Asia and Europe, there are mixed use neighborhoods with light industrial and people living as a matter of course. And in fact, I live within walking distance, a little bit below the picture here. There are far too few people in Detroit that can walk to work. So we want to create an environment where people can both live and work in a place that's not a last resort, but a first choice. That's one of the higher density little enclaves. And suddenly, for organizations that's focused on commercial development and food sector, now we're back to neighborhood revitalization work, which is work I came out of before I came to Detroit. So for me, it's not new. But those neighbors, we face two forms of gentrification. We don't want to gentrify them out of the neighborhood by bringing food processing to them. And we don't want to force food out of the core neighborhood by bringing too much other development to it. So it's a double gentrification story. So in the olden days, before we all wore masks, this is Flower Day when upwards of 30 or 40,000 people come in one weekend to the Eastern Market campus. We have to carefully protect this place as a distinctive gathering place. And there we thought through what's our strategy not to expand, but to actually keep the character evolving, but not changing so much that it was unrecognizable. And so we did need to preserve smaller food uses. First of all, by expanding the area where we could put larger footprint businesses and then repurposing some of their buildings they left behind for smaller companies. Even though we know that percentage of overall use is likely to decline. We think there are appropriate scale and context issues, so height limits and conditional uses. This is that zoning variance that we're talking about, the zoning changes we're talking about. So if you want to build a new office building that is in the market district, that's a conditional use, which means it's going to have to go through another layer of analysis, and you're going to have to convince your neighbors that office building is a good thing to add to the neighborhood. And then we have to be very careful about leveraging whatever tools and persuasion we have so that buildings that are historic and contribute to the character of the neighborhood aren't torn down on a whim. And so We think the mix of business is critical. We've had a mix of retailers and wholesale businesses for a long time. We have added very organically places to live, but we now are faced with a huge expansion from maybe 120 total units in the market district. As many as 1,200 are being talked about, and about 400 right now are in the development pipeline, or actually 800 are in the development pipeline already. So where do those go? How do you integrate that kind of scale development without disrupting the overall character of the market? And ultimately in the core area, how do we keep it safe so that still some small food uses can call it home, to keep that DNA of the market as a place about food? Now this is that rail corridor that I showed you, the picture that was highly overgrown. And this is an area in the plan. There's a major commercial corridor that we won't see any slides of, but this is this kind of bisects the district. And all of these old buildings used to be large industrial scaled food processing operations served by rail. Well, they're all very interesting sets of old bricks that have no future use as major food production, but developers like them a lot for conversion to adaptive reuse. And so city owns a big vacant lot to the right here. We just put out an RFP. And why would this project fit into what we're trying to accomplish? Well, it's at a site we don't expect to stay for food. It's currently, the RFP was awarded to developers proposing 120 residential units, 120 parking spaces, and 4,000 square feet of commercial space that they're willing to work with us to rent at. They don't really, the commercial space to them was unimportant. They went there for the housing, and they're true mixed income housing developers. They will pursue 9% low income housing tax credits. And while the city of Detroit recommends a 20% set aside for any new multifamily projects for people making 80% area median income or less, in Detroit, 80% area median income or less, which is based on the metropolitan pay scales, is still beyond the reach of most Detroit residents. It's still closer to market rate than it is affordable housing. This developer proposes 40% market rate, 20% at 80%, 20% at 50%, and 20% at 40% area median income. True mixed income housing, which means that as we develop food businesses, which by the way have the highest percentage of entry-level living wage jobs of any sector in the economy that do not require a high school diploma, we actually can have housing that people making $15 to $20 an hour can afford to rent. So people can live in a cool place and walk to work. So that economic diversity of that housing portfolio makes that a project we can support. We had to move quickly though. This was 140,000 square foot cold storage building and production line for fresh burger patties. And we had to move with the city and work hard. Or this project, the only other place in the metropolitan area was 10 miles away and outside the city of Detroit, and those 150 jobs would have been lost. So we had to scramble quickly. And it sits off by itself. It's not neighborhood scale, but with greenways and setbacks and a lot of trees, it can be made to be part of a job-rich neighborhood. Now, what the pandemic's revealed to us is the importance of food, and the healthy diet is really what caused so much of our problem as a country, is that so many people, particularly those with type 2 diabetes, 40% of COVID deaths, at one estimate I read, were people with type 2 diabetes. So we, like Food to Power, do a lot to work with partners in the urban ag space. We have a project in our market district that we bought the site to keep a market garden as prices went up. This is the place where 1,900 gardens in Detroit come to pick up their transplants, both vegetable and some plants and flowers. This is a place where they come to sell extra. This is a place when they build their new educational center where they'll come to learn more about how to become better farmers. We actually also just relocated the home of General U.S. Grant, and are also learning how to reposition monuments, not so much to be honorific to General Grant, but to tell the full story of his time in Detroit, to talk about his involvement with slavery, as we also talk about his involvement in dismantling the KKK. So it's an opportunity to really tell a wide-ranging narrative and help educate people about the real history of the United States. We help food entrepreneurs along the way. This is an hourly place to rent kitchens. I've been dawdling too much. I got to go fast now. But this is our facility where we have taken an old big property and broken it in to smaller spaces to accelerate food businesses that come out of a shared use kitchen. So we call this the Metro Accelerator, 5 suites, 3 of them rented to people of color. An important characteristic for us is that we want to support food equity, and we have people of color and new Americans get preference for the spaces. Again, these rents are held well below market pricing. These are the quality of the facility. This is a sister facility that's owned by the facility is owned by us, and we lease it to a company owned by South Asians who do co-packing for 15 other food companies in the Detroit ecosystem of food makers. We've got a lot of arts and long-time businesses. How do we keep them? Well, who in your community, a lot of planning and design requirements go into helping create that supportive infrastructure around city development protocols. But one thing we did interesting is this is that protocol I talked about where we set up different specific things we're looking for when you come to our neighborhood and we want to see in your project. And I'll be happy to send you a copy send a copy of this to you guys. There's 2 different sets, one for food companies, it's about 12 things, and one for mixed use projects is about 18 things. Some things we're asking them to pledge in the future. So you're going to tell us what your rent rates are. You're going to show up at our annual conference. You're going to tell us what your employment numbers are. And then we score people. And if you don't reach a minimum score, you don't get our support. So if you need our support to go to the city to get a zoning change, if you need our support to go get some brownfield tax credits, and your project doesn't meet our test, sorry, come back. Let's talk about it. We don't have to be harsh judges. We just want to nudge you in the right direction. Not enough communities, I think, when development waves coming at them, articulate what they want so they can actually ask developers what they want, or they can tell developers what they want and have a dialogue about meeting somewhere in the middle. We keep active data. So, we had a spate of small business closings when this will happen in a lot of towns where the first wave hits and property values go up, and all of a sudden downtown merchants who are in their 70s, who never thought they could retire in dignity, can suddenly sell their building and do something other than be in the store 12 hours a day. That's not defeat. That's an American victory. Now, the fact is, if the community wants that business to persist while that business owner goes off into some well-deserved retirement, maybe we as nonprofit organizations should be trying to intervene earlier to find someone to pass a successful business on to that can preserve that type of business in new ownership as the real estate itself is sold. So that's something we try to have an early warning system now to make sure if we see a older couple, older family owned business that's thinking about selling, we try to get there sooner than later to try to see if there's a business that can be sold instead of just the real estate. What we have seen, excuse me, is actually an increase in small business, even though prices have gone up, because so many of the investments have gone into putting large buildings back onto the market that have been abandoned or vacant for a long time, and they were broken up from big food uses into smaller uses. We also track the number of chain businesses as a negative, and we track the number of Black businesses as something we're trying to actively encourage. So if you don't measure it, you can't tell if you're succeeding or not. And again, I talked about earlier, let's recognize those developers that live up to the ideas that we establish. Let's thank them. Let's build that support for them. So how, quickly now, shifting gears, how can all this help you guys meet your challenge? Well, I think you got a great natural environment. You have a very interesting built environment with a lot of low-scale commercial space and some high rises associated with large surface parking lots. So to me, if I were, again, just knowing enough to be dangerous, I would say there are some interesting opportunities on how those large surface parking lots get programmed in a way that you can create some expectations about how those developers might be your allies. You got to create this business mix that features independence, like every downtown I know of. There are very few chains, and sometimes those that are, they sometimes add value, and sometimes they don't. And then, how can we be more inclusive as a downtown? And how can we tell the stories of this city so we don't have to fight whether we're more like Colorado College or focus on a family, that everybody has a story to tell, and let's celebrate the diversity of those stories. If you didn't notice, as a country, we're really terrible at small business. Oh, we talk Small Business Saturday, sponsored by American Express, I believe. Thank you very much. We're not really good at it. And I found this out when I was an exchange student in Greece, exchange student in my dreams, a late life sabbatical in Greece, where in the 5th year of their depression, they still had more storefront retail vitality than most American cities do. And if you look at the numbers of small and medium enterprise per 1,000 people in the US, we're about 69th in the world at just below 20 small and medium enterprise per 1,000 people. Greece was 17th in the world at somewhere just under 70 small businesses per 1,000 people. So, and it's just gotten worse with the pandemic. So Walmart, Amazon, Alibaba, it's really, it, our support for small businesses as a country and as people, there's no culture. If in Greece you went and ordered something online, all of your sister-in-law and brothers-in-law and cousins would be very mad at you because you didn't shop at their store. So again, adding another Subway doesn't do much for our downtowns. All those independent retailers, this is, by the way, not a shoe store, but a chocolate store. So who's minding that store? I mean, Downtown Partnership is probably doing a lot of work in this space. We find that the market itself is a fabulous incubator of businesses. It's the original pop-up, as I described earlier. Who's looking to make sure that we're maintaining nice diversity of retail rental price points, so that there is space for successful pop-ups to get started without bankrupting themselves? Is there a role for nonprofit developers? And again, talked about it earlier. Can we do some better succession planning to make sure those great businesses who are owned by people who want to retire, when they get the price on the building they want, is there someone that we could move that business on to that could keep it there or at a different place and keep that business tradition alive for the downtown? Now, I don't think we as downtown folks think, everybody's got a facade program, and typically we're all looking for these cool Victorian color schemes. And when this new business opened up in Eastern Market and painted their bright red and yellow motif, I shed a tear, because what a beautiful historic building if we could just get it a good color scheme. Well, you know what? There's a lot of economic pretension in that, because if you didn't know it, there was a great book written by a guy, Carlton Wagner, called The Color Response Report, and the socioeconomic impacts of color are fascinating. Essentially, the darker the tone, the higher it appeals to people with more income. The brighter and more basic the color, the more it appeals to people of modest incomes. And so if you ever noticed Dollar Castle and Dollar General and Five Below and Family Dollar, there's not a dark earth tone amongst them. It's a fabulous read. There's gender dynamics. I encourage you to look it up. It's fascinating. It's hard to find because it's goes back to the 80s, but I learned more about this from color from this guy I never learned about anything, man. And if we don't think about how downtown feels to people that are slightly less fortunate than us, they'll never feel comfortable. So it starts with having a little bit of empathy and understanding of what it needs to look like, and then also what products. Now, if we do nothing and the economy bounces back, we're going to not have any shortage of bars and restaurants open up. But is there still a place you can get your shoes fixed? Is there still a place you can do some of those goods and services that people from a number of different household types would want in a downtown that's accessible to all? So if we don't think about the tenant mix in terms of how it appeals to everybody, just like we did when we discovered that we needed to keep that low cost produce at the market to make sure that people without a lot of money still felt comfortable there. These are percentages from your demographics, 13% over 65. A lot of them retiring with a lot less money than they had previously. Almost 12% people in poverty already. That's not counting people near poverty. 13% people speak other than English in their home. 22%. Again, I'm not arguing this as a do-good. I'm saying those are all significant disposable incomes that should be being spent downtown, not on the edge of town. And how can we make sure that those people feel welcome? We'll finish with food. Working class neighborhood in Barcelona, this is their offering. Working class neighborhood in Detroit, this is their offering. And we wonder why we have a higher incidence of death from COVID-19. This is a aisleway dedicated to soybean and sugar-based sweeteners. This was from a trip I took to Greece. These three are from a bed and breakfast, or from a small hotel I stayed at. That's one breakfast for a hotel with 20 guests. This was the breakfast offering at the Marriott, not Marriott, it was not that high end. It was the Howard Johnson, excuse me. The reason I took this picture was the eggs had a kind of a nuclear afterlife kind of glow to them. And the sausage fiber looked a little otherworldly as well. This was all whole food. This was all a delicious selection for 40 guests. This is what was made available as a free breakfast for 200 guests. And we wonder why we have a national health epidemic. Tying Colorado Springs to statewide initiatives around agriculture, I think, are important. It's happening. The National Western just announced a new partnership around apprenticeships in regenerative agriculture with a group out of New Mexico. Who farms next is a big question because most of our farmers are over 65. Sorry, going the wrong way. Indoor stuff's coming. Whether it ever gets market share, we'll see. We got an interesting entrant in Detroit coming online. You've got great farmers markets. You can nourish your local growers. You can connect them back to the Hillside Hub. You've got a wonderful network. Are they working together? I don't know. But we have something called Detroit Community Networks where we try to work together to promote each other's farmers markets. I hope that's happening in Colorado Springs. Avoid some fads. Food halls are hot the world over. I'm not sure they're any different than the shopping center court, but I think sidewalk dining in the United States is finally established as a trend. It might have taken 30 years and might have taken COVID, but something the rest of the world embraces. As you look at the pictures you sent me, Claire, you got a lot of outdoor cafes, and they're only going to be busier than ever this year with people's lingering COVID concerns. You got the mountains. Thessaloniki, Greece had water. Rock Island, Illinois had water. We're good at downtown sometimes in streetscapes, and this is an Illinois community that had a financial windfall of a casino boat. And without this active storefronts, without those compelling businesses, it's not enough to have pretty streetscapes. It's all about the business mix. And sometimes it doesn't have to be pretty. I pine, these are actually the nicest tables and chairs this business has ever had. And it doesn't matter because the barbecue, the thing that sells this facility is this wave of barbecue smoke that washes over what is in Detroit, the place where many of the Motown sidemen still play. All of our towns have great stories to tell. We got to do a better job of telling, whether it's through special events or public art. We birthed between 2015 and 2019 in a mural festival that was selected by Smithsonian Magazine as one of the 6 best in the world. This is one of my favorites this is 2 neighbors that were left on their block looking out for each other's back after 30 years of all their neighbors moving out. This, if you can't read it, says, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. And that's a group of mostly white suburbanites getting their picture taken in front of that mural. Now, I don't know if that had any epiphany for those folks. I just know that there's a chance for them to think about that as they stand there and appreciate that beautiful piece of public art. So art helps us connect with those tough issues we have to discuss and helps create a sense of interest and a sense of shared community. You guys are good at it already. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Just, I think, curating those stories to tell the full story of Colorado Springs is part of how you resist losing your soul. Leveraging all of this to tell the full narrative. So I'm done. The wave's coming. It's already here. Are you ready? I got time for some question and answers.
Thank you so much, Dan. And now I would love to welcome Dr. Stephanie Rose Spalding to facilitate our brief Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes, so let's make them count.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan, for such a wonderful presentation and everything that you have shared with us about your work, as well as connecting it to Colorado Springs. There are some questions from our viewers, and we really got a lightning round to try to get to them. One of the questions, you speak about accessibility to all. And so both of these questions are really kind of related. And they ask, what is your advice to a community that is sprawling away from its downtown center? And how do we maintain a community soul when we are, in a lot of ways, a transient city? So both of those questions really trying to talk to, again, the core themes of your presentation, a community soul when we are a transient city because of the military, as well as advice regarding sprawl and moving more and more away from downtown center.
Yeah, I think those are great questions, and one could argue that COVID has had an effect of sort of making people move away from the core, but I think much of that impact will I think that will lessen much in the coming 24 months. I'm going to focus first on the suburbanization. I would argue that as places suburbanize, the core becomes that much more important to be the place where it brings people together. And so whether that's programming or whether that's downtown group reaching out and building stronger partnerships with some of those people on the edge, those farmers market looks like they're spread hither and yon. You can take some of this stuff on the road. So we at Eastern Market have a pop-up program where we take Eastern Market non-COVID times to 35 or 40 sites around the city and try to tell the stories about food equity, food access, and food nourishment. So it's not easy, but I think that the good news is most suburban development is usually such, I would say, cookie cutter stuff that the qualities of downtown become even more important to those people if you can accentuate and make downtown an even more compelling place. I think its value goes up as you go out. And then I think that I don't have a lot of experience working in either university towns or mostly military towns, but I would be interested to see, what kind of percentage is actually transient. From my field, Colorado Springs, it's significant, but it's not a defining moment like you'd have in a Boulder or a place that doesn't have the amount of other community stabilizing influences that Colorado Springs has. But I think in those particular cases, I think what I have had luck with in some university towns is when you can really get the town and gown relationships, and in this case, the town and base relationships, or I guess actually Air Force Academy is more of a traditional town and gown function. It really becomes trying to break through some of that bureaucracy and trying to connect with leadership at the base or at the higher education center, where they come to understand the value of being in the middle of this place and why it's in their best interest, if they want to keep their cadets happy, if they want to keep their students happy, that it makes sense for them to partner with the local community to build bridges together. So it's not easy. It used to be impossible, but I think if you look around the country, there are a number of universities that have really stepped up and are trying to be better neighbors. And so maybe identify some of those and work with, I think, both your organization, the Colorado Springs campus at the U of C, as well as Air Force Academy.
We have another question, and probably the last question for this evening, and it comes from Jill, who wants to know if you can be a little bit more specific in how you handle gentrification with your group and BIPOC equity. And again, thinking about this accessibility, even as the value of the downtown goes up, if we don't have a mass transit system, like, it's not Detroit. And if you don't, how do you deal with the BIPOC equity in the process?
Well, we don't, Detroit has craptastic, we don't have, we're the largest city in America with the worst mass transit. So we focus on BIPOC equity in terms of business creation and entrepreneurship activities. So we have, we measure the number, we're not happy with the number of merchants of color that we have in the market district. I think we're now up to 15 out of about, there's about total about 150 businesses. That's a 33% increase in the last 3 years, but we're still far below what we want to be. In our different markets, we have a Saturday market that's mostly farmers and prepared food vendors. Farmers are, we have a lot of urban farmers, people of color. Collectively, they come to market, but they're very, very small, and many of them are not large enough to come to market by themselves. So farmers are a pretty white demographic right now. That's why that urban gardening facility is so important to us, to try to continue to launch next generation Black farmers that can scale. The value added makers are where we're trying to spend a lot of our money on incubation acceleration to benefit people of color. And so trying to grow Black value added food businesses. We had Lush Yummy's custard pie, Lush Yummy's pie company was selected by Oprah this year as one of her favorite things during the Christmas season. She had just moved from a second kitchen into one of our facilities where she could afford to move in, increase production, and move from 2,000 pies a month to 15,000 pies a month. So we're trying to do it as we can find it. The Sunday market, which we have, is all about stuff. And there's great stuff being made in Detroit, and that is actually our highest percentage. We have 60%, 70% women-owned businesses, 60% people of color, and 50% Detroit residents at the Sunday market. So we track that data. We're trying to improve it wherever we can. And we're just trying to draw attention wherever we can to providing the space, to providing the access to market, to providing the access to advice, to provide the access to capital, to make sure that a lot of what really white entrepreneurs have had from their extended family networks without a lot of effort are made available to people of color. Now, in terms of engaging with the neighbors around the market, who are primarily African-American, it's organizing them, working with them to understand what their goals are. There's only 40 or 50 households, and a lot of them have just never been organized. They have become organized over the last couple of years, and we're working with them and trying to identify the philanthropic and corporate support we can to make sure as we build facilities to process food near them, that we're doing home repairs and that we're repairing the streets in front of theirs and sidewalks in front of their houses so that there is true equity.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you again for such a wonderful presentation and spending this evening with us here in Colorado Springs, and for downtown Colorado, for Colorado Springs, for all of the work that is being done, all of our partners, and this conversation. Thank you once again.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie Rose. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Patience, for investing in this conversation. I can see from the chat it is resonating with the folks watching. So I want to let you know that we will be posting it at downtowncs.com/city center as both a video recording and a podcast. So if you are subscribed to our newsletter, you will get a notification when those are posted. If you just want to check back, it should be up within the next 2 weeks. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your St. Patrick's Day if you're celebrating tonight. Either way, we appreciate you taking the time, and we will see you again on April 14th.